After studying this module, you should be able to learn the theories of business cycles, various theories, that is psychological theory, profit theory, monetary theory, innovation theory, and the Cobweb Theorem. You would also know about the multiplier accelerator principle and theories given by Samuelson and Hicks. Growth of all economies is characterized by the ups and downs of economic activity, and this leads to a phenomenon called business cycles. The economies generally follow a pattern in which there would be ups and downs, and there are certain phases of these cycles. The business cycles are normally found within the economy, and they are prompted by internal factors, and such business cycles are known as endogenous. Sometimes the stimulus for such business cycles comes from outside. There could be events such as war, and such business cycles are exogenous. There are different theories about business cycles, and there are different approaches which attempt to explain such observed fluctuations. Any given theory concentrates on the modeling of these common patterns. They basically study the empirical fluctuations and try to isolate the factors or the determinants behind such cyclical movements. Now we shall discuss one by one all these theories. The psychological theory known as the business cycle theory of mass behavior is an attempt to explain the different phases of cyclical fluctuation in terms of subjective factors. Individuals and their behavior is strongly influenced by the beliefs of the groups to which they belong. That is, individual consumers do not behave actually by their own individual patterns, but they are influenced by the society around them. There are times when the general mood is optimistic, and there are times when the mood is pessimistic. Gibbons in the 19th century believed that cyclical patterns in the economy depended upon these mood variations, which could be characterized as optimism, speculative fever, disillusionment, and panic. Daniel Defoe maintained that over-optimism of businessmen during good times causes them to increase their capital equipment beyond a point of time, beyond a point of safety, ultimately which leads to crisis. John Stuart Mill also believed in such a phenomenon. In the early 20th century, Pigou worked out a theory called the psychological theory of business cycles. He believed that the changing assumptions of the entrepreneurs about the future, the expectations, played a crucial role in the cyclical ups and downs in the economy. According to Pigou, the psychological law of large numbers prevailed, and if individuals behaved autonomously in such a manner that this would lead to errors in their expectations and differences in economic behavior, which tended to offset on the balance. But if they imitate each other, then there is a human tendency which leads to non-compensated errors. This would accumulate and acquire a huge magnitude capable of powerful economic effects. This follow the crowd tendency or the herding tendency, according to Pigou, is an important factor in the financial booms and crisis, the ups and downs that take place, particularly it is seen in the stock markets and the behavior of investors. The moods of optimism and pessimism themselves are rooted in economic factors. Pigou linked the psychological behavior with economic factors to present a complete analysis of the cyclical behavior. During prosperity, there is over-optimism and an attitude towards the current business conditions, and it is guided by the prospect for future profits. Pigou called this the error of optimism. When the entrepreneurs realize that this expectation would not be materialized, then they react strongly in the reverse direction, leading to an error of pessimism. So there is an alternation of optimism and pessimism. The pessimistic reaction may be further aggravated by bankruptcies and other evidences which lead to a depressed state of the economy. The psychological theory is also a part of Keynesian economics. Keynes maintained that the ups and downs in the economy are influenced by various psychological determinants. The basic psychological laws that make for a falling marginal propensity to consume and the subjective factors that are associated with liquidity preference and the assessment of marginal efficiency of capital, all of these factors, according to Keynes, depend upon the psychology of the business world. According to Keynes, during a boom period, unrealistically optimistic expectations win over the systematic calculations. In a sharp contrast, during the economic crisis, entrepreneurs lose faith in the possibility of intensive expansion of output. The profit theory. The profit theory of business cycles is associated with the name of Mitchell and Lescure. It is a theory of self-generating cycles and depends upon the internal processes of the business system. Cyclical fluctuations are attributed to the inherent stability of the modern capitalistic system. It singles out profit fluctuations as the basic force controlling business activity in the capitalistic economy. A central factor is the quest for profits, leading to the cumulative changes in the economy by which one set of business conditions transform into another set. Thus, all those factors like material cost, factor prices, availability and cost of credit, volume of sales, etc., that affect the prospects of profits play an important role in inducing cyclical fluctuations in the economy. Economic expansion is dominated by the growing business demand based on rising profit expectations. The expectations of making attractive profit induces the active competition amongst business firms for raw materials, for labor, for loan and for capital, equipment and so on. This leads to shortages and puts an upward pressure on the prices, which then squeeze the profit margins. Fixed rental costs and the depreciation costs also rise with an increase in factory space and capital equipment. This is accompanied by excessive burden on business management, the use of old and obsolete equipment and less efficient workers to fulfill orders and to meet the heavy demand. Such factors reduce the efficiency and push costs up, thereby encroaching upon profit margins. Excess capacity and excess production in a number of industries results due to the error of optimism during good times. This limits or halts the possibility of an increase in commodity prices to cover up the increase in costs. As prosperity grows in the economy, such stress factors get gradually built up in the system and finally it disrupts the equilibrium. As profits grow, the business expansion is as the growth of profit diminishes, the business expansion is halted, and cost-cutting measures, that is layoffs, reduced hours of employment and lower salaries, etc., set in, and this becomes the dominant mode. Merchants and businesses try to clear their unsold stocks. There is no inducement to invest due to the idle capacity and piling up of stocks. Production units also defer their investment plans in expectation of a fall in the cost in obtaining funds in the future. Once the downturn has started, the cumulative pressure drives the economy down to the depression from where the revival would start, but immediately the economy is down in the dumps. Under the pressure of depressed situation, material and interest costs are reduced, accumulated stocks are gradually used up, and the investment seeking funds are growing. This is accompanied by a continuous growth in the population, development of new tastes amongst consumers and the like. Such factors improve productivity and increase profit expectations. An improved outlook for profit begets a revival of economic activity, and the recovery of the economy firms up, and step by step the capital spending and hiring of labor also increases. Increase in the prices in different segments of the economy, the wholesale or retail segment, occurs with a lag and with varying degrees of sensitivity. An increased sale in the commodity prices raises profits, and the cumulative process is once again started, taking the economy to new heights of prosperity. This process is known as the stage of recovery. In this stage, after this stage, the prices of materials and factor inputs increase, putting a pressure on profits, thus leading to a cyclical movement, and this cycle goes on repeating. There is prosperity, there is a downturn, there is recession, there is depression, once again there is revival, and again there is prosperity. So this cycle continues. Monetary theory. The monetary theorists like Friedman, Hawthorne attributed business cycles to the expansion and contraction of money supply. For them, business cycles were a nominal or a monetary phenomenon. Changes in the money supply lead to the fluctuations in business and output. An increase in the money supply leads to an upswing and a boom along with inflationary conditions, while a contraction in money supply leads to the downside and it leads to recessionary conditions. In a wider sense, the group of theorists like Robertson, who contended that the initial impulse may come from other factors, but money supply changes due to it changes the picture in an important way, and it also includes such theories are also included in the monetary approach. Now let us consider the quantity theory of money. If we consider the Cambridge equation, K is M, which is the money supply, is equal to K multiplied by Y, where M is the real cash balance, K is a positive constant which is known as the reciprocal of the velocity of circulation of money, Y is the nominal income. This equation is based on the modern approach of monetary instability. Here we must note that the velocity of circulation of money in this case is known as the income velocity of circulation of money. Credit is inherently unstable. Left to itself, it would fluctuate widely in the economy, and for some reason there occurs an increase in the gap between the profit rate and the interest rate in the economy, and this may result in lowered interest rate consequent upon an increase in the money supply or due to some positive changes in the real sector that increases profits. This widening gap leads to an increase in the demand for inventories and subsequently for bank credit and money supply in the economy. More purchasing power in the hands of the people leads to greater demand and further increase in the demand for inventories increase, and in credit the increase in production and employment generation and incomes, and also further increase in demand and so on. The increasing demand further puts an upward pressure on the prices of commodities. Prices increase such that there is no fall in the cost of production. If the cost of production declines, prices do not fall proportionately or stay at the same level. This is relative inflation. Whether it is about absolute or relative inflation, the profit margins increase and the gap between profit and interest rates widen. According to Laidler, this process will be interrupted due to a drain on the currency from the banks as expenditure of the public increases. When banks realize that their currency component is falling, they would start increasing the rate of interest. Market interest rate will exceed the natural rate of interest. The restricted credit policy and high interest rates discourage new investment, leading to a downswing. The output and income falls, demand falls, investment falls further, and cash starts flowing back to the bank. Wages are rigid and fall with a lag. The process continues till money supply is in line with production. But as soon as the cash reserves with banks improve, again the banks start to use credit liberally and the revival process starts. This takes the economy onto the path towards expansion and ultimately to the boom. Instead of a new equilibrium being reached at the higher level of income, no equilibrium is reached and the economy continuously remains in a state of oscillation or disequilibrium. Hawthorne believed that the rescue lies with the banks only by the effective use of lending rates to control the boom and the recessions in the economy. Any government expenditure would be ineffective and will only lead to crowding out of private investment. Now let us consider the innovation theory. Economists such as Schumpeter and Robertson considered business cycles to be a part of the technological and other innovation processes that take place in the economy. Innovations primarily consist of major changes in the methods of production and or transportation, changes in the industrial organization, or in the production of new variants of commodities, or the creation of a new commodity, opening up of new markets, or the discovery of new sources of raw materials. In industrial history, the world's most significant booms have been characterized by the revolutionary changes in the form of innovations such as railways. For instance, in the 40s, the steel in the 80s, and electricity in the 90s. The uptrend takes place in the economy. It is carried out through such innovations. The implementations lead to an immediate increase in demand for construction and investment goods. The pioneering firm enjoys a sort of monopoly profit for some time. The duration of the uptrend depends upon the gestation period of the new investment. Overinvestment often results as the firms race to reap high profits. The resulting increase in output and employment are further carried forward due to an increase in incomes, demand, and so on. After a while, too many entrepreneurs copy the innovations of the pioneering firm. The competitive behavior forces profits to go down. Robertson mentions that the rising cost and inefficiencies would eventually creep in. These factors, combined with under savings and unequal income distribution during a boom period, lead to a fall in the investment output and depression begins. The market or the unprofitable firms that are gradually wiped out from the market, and this leads to a business sentiment which is adversely affected. A new innovation will create the foundation for another boom, so one need not worry about such phases of depression. There is another theory given by Condertief, discarded technology changes as a cause for long wave cycles. He observed historical data and argued that causality actually worked in the opposite direction. New ideas exist at all points of time. What is required? The optimistic business conditions and the availability of funds to implement these ideas. The innovations themselves are at many times may be dictated by the needs of the economy and its capacity to implement them. Now we have something called the Cobweb Theorem. A Cobweb Theorem is based on the notion of there being adjustments in the lags of production and consequent upon the changes in the price. Such lags are the result of the intrinsic time gap between production decisions and the supply of output. It marks a sharp break away from the earlier static analysis of price and quantity, and fluctuations in the economy were earlier presumed to be instantaneously adjusted. The emphasis is on the importance of the dynamic adjustment process. The idea was initially applied to the cases of agricultural cycles in the early 19th century. In the agricultural sector, output fluctuations due to vagaries of the monsoon was a common feature. The resulting price fluctuations further led to the fluctuations in supply for the subsequent period, which is based on the observed price of the current year. And this is a continuous process which acts with a lag. Thus, the continuing movement of the production and prices is witnessed in the agricultural sector. The amplitude and the pattern of these fluctuations would depend upon the relative elasticities of demand and supply. The concept of lagged output response to the price changes under competitive market conditions later provided the basis for these business cycles in the non-agricultural sectors as well. The first systematic explanation of such a self-perpetuating cycle came from the 20th century from the independent researchers, that is Jan Tinbergen and others. Schultz also was one of these economists. Schultz looked at these types of cyclical fluctuations as arising from the introduction of time lags in the adjustment process. And three types of fluctuations have been explained under this theory: convergent oscillation, divergent oscillation and perpetual oscillation. These primarily result from the differing relative elasticities of demand and supply of a commodity. A pattern of convergent oscillation results if the supply is relatively less elastic than demand. The adjustment of price and quantity occurs in such a manner that each fluctuation is smaller than the preceding one. There is a tendency to approach the equilibrium position. As you would be able to see that this is leads to the constant interaction of demand and supply leads to a fluctuating pattern. In a given initial price of P1, the producer will supply an amount of OQ2, and in the next time period at price P1, this results in an excess supply of amount AB, which puts a downward pressure on the price. Given the demand curve D, the consumer are ready to purchase this amount only at a lower price, which is P2. Taking the price as P2 as given, the producers will produce an amount of OQ3 in the subsequent period. Excess demand at this price pushes the price up to P3, which becomes the base for the next period for quantity. As it can be seen in the figure, the oscillations are dampening. Okay, so this means that the system is moving towards equilibrium, but equilibrium does not take place automatically in each period. Part B of the figure traces the movements in the index of quantity over time, showing a cyclical pattern. The supply being less elastic, the producers respond less to a given price change. As demand is relatively more elastic, a given change in the demand is accomplished with a further smaller price change. Again, relatively less elastic supply leads to further smaller change in the available supplies, and the process continues with dampened oscillations. We shall now discuss about the Samuelson theory of business cycles. The Samuelson's model explains business cycles as an integrated approach which combines the theory of multiplier with the principle of acceleration. Multiplier is a process where income increases due to an increase in the investment. Now, in the case of accelerator, it is quite the opposite. When income increases, it leads to demand for investment. The dynamic model shows how the two principles interact with each other to cause a fluctuation in the economic activity. Investment is the most volatile component of national income. Therefore, the main cause of cyclical movements in the economy is investment. The fluctuations that take place in investment are amplified because of the interaction between the multiplier and the accelerator. When the accelerated principle is added to the mechanism of the multiplier, it makes for such cyclical oscillations in the economy. The increase in incomes leads to an increase in consumption demand. The extent of this increase would depend upon the marginal propensity to consume. This increase in consumption would create further demand for investment in the absence of any excess production capacity. The increase in the national income thus stimulates investment via the increase in consumption demand. The accelerator principle says that a small change in consumption spending can cause a big percentage change in investment. It assumes that the capital output ratio tends to remain constant. The new induced or derived investment demand will stimulate a further multiplier process, thus producing additional incomes, again leading to more demand for consumer goods, further increase in the investment, and so on. This is a process continues through the interaction of the multiplier and the accelerator. Let us now move on to the other theory, which is known as the Hickson theory. The Hickson theory of business cycles is based on the multiplier interaction, accelerator interaction, but it differs with the Samuelson's version. First of all, there is the synthesis of growth factors with the cycle inducing forces. He maintains, that is Hicks maintains, that autonomous investment increases at a constant percentage rate due to technological progress and innovation as well as population growth, with further assumptions of a stable multiplier and accelerator. The equilibrium income and output will also grow at the same percentage. External shocks leading to induced investment pushes the economy off the equilibrium path and leads to business cycles via the multiplier accelerator interaction. The second important point of departure is in the introduction of ceilings and floors to the movements of output and income. Hicks chooses a certain value of the multiplier and accelerator and believes that to be the representative of the real world. He maintains that the value of marginal propensity to consume and the accelerator is in the region of A and D identified by Samuelson and needs to be totally ignored as they produce non-oscillatory growth which contradicts the constant amplitude cycle. Also, it has a low probability since it can happen only under the unique situation to the product of MPC and the accelerator being equal to 1. Of the two cases, the dampening and the explosive cycles that remain, Hicks also rules out the dampening cycles for the reason that he presumes that the disappearance of the fluctuations over time, which is again contrary to the historical experience. Explosive cycles are not borne out by historical data, but these can be made realistic by introducing limits to the amplitude of the cycle by keeping it within bounds. Thus, the upswing of a cycle stops when it meets the upper limit and the downswing stops at the lower limit, resulting in a continuous cyclical movement with an overall upward trend, a pattern corresponding to those which are found in history. To start with, the economy is at a point along the equilibrium path. Now suppose an invention takes place leading to an outburst of induced investment. The working of the multiplier accelerator explains a big divergence that takes place, and it takes the economy to a point where it hits the ceiling. It may crawl along the ceiling for a while, and ultimately there would be a lag in the output and the induced investment. At this point, the accelerator ceases to operate and the multiplier in itself is inadequate to sustain an increase in the output. Income starts to fall, induced investment also declines, and the accelerator principle undergoes a transformation and the accelerator starts to work in the reverse direction. Let us now evaluate the various theories of business cycles that we have considered. Business cycle is a complex phenomenon that depends on a mix of monetary and non-monetary factors. It cannot be attributed solely either to psychological factors or to technological innovation or to supply lags or to profit or money supply fluctuations. In fact, apart from all of these, there are also explanations in terms of multiplier and acceleration. So it is a combination of all these factors which are responsible for business cycles. Two or more factors often work in interaction with each other to produce a business cycle in the economy. movements may be initiated by any single change which takes place in the economy, but other factors also cumulate the effect and thereby generate a continuous cycle in the economy. The relative appropriateness of alternative theories can be judged on the basis of the following three criteria. To what extent is a given theory able to explain the real world phenomenon in simple terms? To what extent is it consistent with micro theoretical concepts of profit maximization, rational choice, market clearing and the like? And thirdly, to what extent it sounds intuitively plausible. Different economists give different priority to different criteria, but the biggest conflict is between consistency and the explanation of observed real world phenomena. Different business cycle theories emphasize different factors and deal with different approaches to describe the explained and observed phenomena. So let us summarize. The psychological theory is a theory of mass behavior and explains cyclical fluctuations in terms of subjective factors or human optimism and pessimism. The profit theory is a theory of self-generating cycles resulting from the inherent stability of the modern capitalist system arising out of profit fluctuations, the inherent instability. Under the monetary approach, it is the changes in the money supply that lead to fluctuations in output and business activity. Innovations theory considers business cycles to be a result of technological and other innovations that take place in the economy. The Cobweb Theorem emphasizes the dynamic adjustment process and attributes cyclical movements to adjustments in the lags in production consequent upon the changes in prices. Samuelson's approach is a dynamic approach, and Samuelson integrates the theory of multiplier with the accelerator principle and shows how the interaction between the two leads to fluctuations in economic activity. Hick's theory is also based on the multiplier accelerator principle, but it incorporates the growth factor and also introduces ceilings and floors to the cyclical movement.